How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, just as a follow-up related to the questions that have been asked of me, we are going to revisit When the System Fails Twice, the Emmanuel Haro case. But right now we're going to focus a lot on Jake Haro, the father. And I believe later next week, I will have an FBI investigator on who's also going to break down some of the concerns. But I thought me and Joe could revisit this case a little bit. I have a few questions I'd like to ask Joe just to get his opinion on this case. So again, just to familiarize you guys with this case, Jake Mitchell Haro. I got some pictures here. Let me just pull them up. All right, there's Jake. This is a better one. There's Jake with his wife, Rebecca. Jake Mitchell Haro and Rebecca Haro currently in custody, charged with the murder of their 7-month-old son, Emmanuel. This is Emmanuel right here. The baby disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and authorities believe he's been killed. The surviving 2-year-old has been removed from their home by Child Protective Services. But here's what makes this case so infuriating and so important to understand. This tragedy, a lot of people believe, was completely predictable and therefore preventable. Jake Haro had already proven he was capable of horrific violence against an infant. The system knew exactly who he was and what he could do, and yet somehow he was free to father more children and strike again. So the question we're asking today isn't just what went wrong, it's what could realistically have been done to prevent this, and why wasn't it? That's why me and Joe are going to have this discussion today, and then later next week I will bring on an FBI retired investigator. But I want to take you guys back real quick. So let me take you back to 2018 when Jake Haro's daughter, Promise, that was her name, Promise, was just 10 weeks old. Promise was rushed to Loma Linda University Medical Center with injuries so severe that doctors were shocked she survived. Her tiny body told the story of systematic, brutal abuse. Multiple broken ribs, both fresh fractures and older ones that were healing, proving this wasn't a single incident, skull fractures, brain hemorrhage that caused permanent neurological damage. Supposedly, she only has 3% of her brain working. Now, again, this is in 2018. Fractured leg bone that was already healing from previous abuse, and severe neck swelling. The pattern was unmistakable. This 10-week-old baby had been tortured over weeks or months. Promise survived, but she was left permanently disabled. Today, 7 years later, she cannot see, cannot walk, cannot talk. Her life was destroyed before it really began. Jake Haro was arrested and charged with felony child cruelty. But here's where the system, we believe, failed. Many believe have failed. Despite the severity of Promise's injuries, prosecutors didn't pursue attempted murder charges in June of 2023, 5 years after the abuse. Haro pleaded guilty and was sentenced to just 180 days in jail plus probation. That's it. 6 months for permanently disabling his infant daughter. While Promise will need lifelong care and will never recover, Jake Haro served his time, got out, started a new relationship with Rebecca. And again, this is Rebecca, and had 2 more children, Emmanuel, who we see here, and a toddler who's now 2 years old. And now Emmanuel is presumed dead, and we're left asking the same questions families like Promises have been asking for years. How does this keep happening? So, Joe, just a quick update. In August of this year, Jake Haro and Rebecca Haro, I believe it was the 22nd, they were arrested for murder charges. Now, they have not discovered the body of Emmanuel Haro, but basically, the mother, Rebecca, said that she was outside of a shopping store. The name of the store escapes me all the time, but either way, she was changing the baby's diaper. Someone came up to her, said "Hola," hit her, knocked her out. When she came back to consciousness, couldn't find the baby. She ran to the store, didn't know where the baby went. She said someone took the baby, and then eventually police found a lot of inconsistencies with her story. Obviously, there was cameras that probably did not show an incident like this. She also had a black guy that looked a little bit older, like as you can see here, that black guy that she had there. I believe that's the day of the interview. That black guy looks to be a little bit older than just getting it. And then basically on the 22nd, which was yesterday, I believe it was yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday. I guess there was enough evidence that they found in and around the house that determined that this baby could have been murdered. And they believe that the suspects right now are going to be Rebecca and Jake. So again, the concerns that a lot of people have watching this is Jake had a history that I just mentioned from 2018, where he did this to let me get her exact age real quick. It was another infant who was, hold on. Sorry, guys. Lost my track here. Promise was, I think, 10 weeks old at the time. Yeah, she was 10 weeks old. And now, 7 years later, she has permanent disability, can't see, can't talk, can't walk. 3% of her brain is functioning. And then somehow or another, 7 years down the line from that incident, but yet 2 years after his conviction, he's able to have another family. And then it looks like his abuse has continued. So I thought this would be an interesting story. And I got some questions I want to run by you just to get your opinion. Again, me and Joe work in the profession of corrections. We're just the average Joe citizen, technically, to some extent, but we do have some experience working with the criminal mind. So I thought me and Joe could have a quick little discussion on, what our thoughts are with where we're at and was this preventable. Hey, Joe, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years, 6 months. I'm currently working as an assistant jail administrator at our local sheriff's department here in the jail division and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
So, Joe, that was a lot there that what I talked about, right? I mean, the 2018 case, and then again, what we have going on in 2025. I mean, it is a bit heart-wrenching, correct?
It's very heart wrenching, and my initial question is the missing child. Now, how is there enough evidence to pursue murder charges on that when there wasn't enough evidence in their view to pursue attempted murder charges on the disabled girl that he beat so savagely? And on top of that, how did he should every subsequent child that he had from that point on should have been taken into CPS custody. I mean, this guy should have had a never ending closing file with CPS, no matter where he went. And, just looking at the guy, just the picture of him with his hand around his wife, it just screams narcissistic right off the bat. And it's heart wrenching. It's gut wrenching that a child endures that kind of abuse, and the perpetrator continues to get away with it.
Now, Joe has not seen the questions I have put together. There's about 10 of them, but Joe just touched on some of them. So it just goes to show you this incident resonates because, Joe, you kind of hit some of the questions that I'll be discussing. But the first question I have, Russ, sorry, so used to having Russ, Joe. The first question I have, Joe, is when you hear about Jake Haro's past, severe abuse, barely any sentence, and then this tragedy, what jumps out to you as the system's biggest miss?
Yeah, and I mean, it was, to me, it seems like it was a total miss from the onset. He should have been charged with attempted murder for all the abuse and all the evidence, all the medical issues that child suffered, that they had evidence of. And that should have been a much more steeper sentence than what I mean, I know drug offenders who've gotten 25 years right out the gate for a drug offense, and here this guy beat this child savagely, abused this child so savagely that she's disabled for the rest of her life. Will never have a normal, productive life. Will always have to remain in some sort of ongoing, continual care. And this guy serves, what was it, 180 days?
Mm-hmm.
So that was definitely a fail. CPS should have from that point on, that child should have been taken, and every subsequent child that this guy fathered should have been taken as soon as it was birthed.
I'm wondering, when he was sentenced the first time in 2018, did he at least make the effort to mandate some anger management programming when he was behind the wall? Like, this was conditional. Like, if we're going to give you 6 months, you must complete these types of programming. Again, he should have gotten a lot more, but I'm wondering if they even put programming in there. Like, did
Yeah,
he
because
complete any programming?
he served how much probation on top of it
It
after
was a
he
few
got out?
years of probation on top of that.
So you would think there would have been some sort of stipulations for, parenting classes, anger management classes, you know, something along those lines. But I mean, it sounds like he did a sentence and walked away.
Yeah, and the condition of probation could be you have to attend these programs, and if you don't, that could bring you back into the system. Sadly, most likely, I don't know how California rolls, but if he didn't take a program, would they bring him back? They may just say it's a technical violation and try to just work around it to
Yeah.
keep him out. And the funny thing is, I want to mention something, Joe, too, and I think you would agree with this. I think sometimes when they get these cases and the prosecutor, they got a lot of cases going on. They set the stage. I guess they work out whatever plea this is just to keep the case moving because they have another case they got to do. And now at the end result is once the guy is released, I don't think really people care as much because we did our end on the front side. He served his time. He was held accountable for his time. I think a lot of people aren't worried too much about what he's going to do next. And that I think could be a real big gap in the criminal justice system, because in corrections, we do put people in programming. We do try our best to make sure that whatever brought them in, somehow or another, it gets addressed. Now, whether they can control it or not, that's why we do have systems that should be put in place to monitor individuals, because if you have someone that's angry, that could be impulsive. So again, if I had somebody that beat up a child that bad, I would never trust them with any child ever again. I just wouldn't. But I don't know if the people that prosecute these crimes, if they're just looking to get the case done and move on to the next one, or are they looking to see, hey, if we move forward and we do this and he gets out in 6 months, what's the ripple effect here? Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, it makes sense. But I mean, for if it's a dope case, a burglary case, a theft case, or an embezzling case, yeah, I can understand, handling things with kid gloves and trying to reach a quick plea deal and going on to the next. You're talking about a human life in this instance. One that was abused so savagely that she'll never ever be normal again. And if that was the thought process on them, shame on them, because that should have never happened. There should have been particular attention paid to this case just because it's a human life who couldn't defend herself against a grown abuser.
And it's funny how we didn't know about this first case in 2018, but we know about it now because of Emmanuel's case. So I guess when it settled out as a plea, it just disappeared. I don't even know if it was even in local news. I didn't get a chance to look that far back. Hey, Joe, why do you think prosecutors stopped at a cruelty charge instead of pushing for attempted murder? Is this about caution or the system protecting itself instead of the kids? I know in some cases it's hard to prove intent. Correct? Would that be a big concern?
Yeah, intent, it is a big deal, especially when you're pursuing murder or attempted murder charges. You got to show intent. Manslaughter, attempted manslaughter, not so much. But with a murder charge, there has to be intent. And I'm sure that the prosecutors had to go with what they had in front of them. They had the abuse, they had the medical evidence to show that this child was definitely abused and victimized and assaulted and broken. So my gut is they probably did not want to take the gamble on an attempted murder charge and this guy just walking away scot free.
So they went with the cruelty because in the end, the end result is you have a child named Promise who is now physically disabled. So that's something that they were able to prove. But the funny thing is, there was pattern there. So I mean, it wasn't like it was someone who maybe had not minimizing what they've done, but maybe had a weak moment. Maybe the child was crying and still no excuse, and they acted immediately to shut the baby up. And then all of a sudden you got all these bruises and stuff. No, I mean, they said in what I read that she had bruises that were already healing. So this was a pattern of abuse. So this is someone that, you may know now because it got so severe. But with that said, it was shown that this child was abused as if it was like just an everyday thing. So I wonder if the pattern was even discussed in that, like, or did they treat it as a one-time concern when they knew that this was a history of cruelty, a history of torture, a history of cruel and unusual punishment? Where is the child's rights in that? Would you agree with that, Joe? Or
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely a pattern. There was definitely a history. I don't know how many times CPS has been involved in this child's life, prior to him serving time. But you can definitely tell just by the child's injuries that there was a pattern there. But again, it's one of those things is what you can actually prosecute, prove, and get a guilty verdict on. And like I said, my gut feeling is, it's just like I can come up and punch you, and you fall back and strike your head, and you bleed out. Yeah, I punched you. I caused your death. Does it rise to murder?
yeah,
You know what I mean? You got to prove the intent. We were in a physical altercation. I just wound up getting the best of you. Unfortunately, I took your life. You know, Again, what was the intent? So intent's kind of a slippery slope, and it's easy to armchair quarterback these and sit back and say that yeah, he should have been prosecuted for murder, and I wholeheartedly agree. He should have been prosecuted to the fullest, and again, it's one of those things where I think the prosecutors went with the sure bet, something they know they could get to stick. Maybe they anticipated the child might pass later on down the line, where they can upgrade the charge. It's just, I honestly think they didn't want to take the gamble and go with attempted murder, and somebody takes one juror, for reasonable doubt, and this guy walks away scot free, never to be charged with it again. So
yeah, it's crazy that cruelty in this manner only gets you 6 months. Like, I mean, the plea. I wonder if it was not a child. I wonder if there was more people advocating for her. Would that plea even have been at the table? Like if this was an adult victim who had a lot of support, would a 6 month if he would have done that to an adult victim who had support, and the end result was an adult who looked like this, I wonder if they would have even settled for 6 months. I maybe part of it here could be that there really were no strong advocates for Emmanuel, and maybe it was easier for them to push for the 6 months because there was no one there to contest it. I mean, maybe.
yeah, but at the forethought of it and at the back of their minds, they should have known that this was going to be some sort of news media and political time bomb. Especially given how young this child was. So, that should have been on their mind already, just, on top of the fact that, it's a child.
Yes.
It's a defenseless child.
And again, now they're going to, whatever happened in 2018 is definitely going to be in the spotlight now, because they believe all this stuff would have been preventable if more action was taken in 2018. Next question I got, Joe, and I think this kind of touches on what we've been talking on, but they said, we both know plea bargains run the system. Do you think this was just another case of cutting a deal to move things along, and at what cost to future victims? These are the questions that are being sent my way.
Yeah, I mean, was it a plea deal? I'm sure it was. Again, I don't know what their charges and what their sentencing guidelines are over there. Given this charge, that may have been the maximum that he could get. Because of the charge itself. Again, it wasn't attempted murder, it wasn't attempted manslaughter. It wasn't any of those charges. It was an abuse charge, just like abuse of the elderly. It doesn't, to me, in my opinion, they don't carry near enough weight that they should. And with this specific issue, I don't think 6 months in jail and followed by a couple of years of probation was anywhere steep enough for a penalty. But given the circumstances again, and given the charge, with whatever their sentencing guidelines is, it may have been the maximum they could give them.
Yeah, so I'm looking to try to see how, so let's say, Jake Haro did this to his child Promise. Did he take her to a hospital immediately? It looks like it really wasn't something he did. Like he abused the child, but then he would basically, the child would be home because they discovered past bruising. Like they discovered bruises that weren't taken care of. So it said, so the bruises and fractures were discovered when Promise was admitted to the hospital as an infant. So this must have been the one where they discovered all these bruises, but they did note that there were ribs that were broke that were already in the process of healing, bruises that were already in the process of healing. So she may have been home for some time without addressing any initial injuries. Then he just started beating her again. Yeah. That could be the case. And medical professional knows severity and extent of the injuries, which triggered a criminal investigation, ultimately led to child cruelty conviction. So what kind of bothers me here a little bit is it noted that some of the injuries that she had when she was brought to medical were injuries that were already healing. That, as I said, I'm thinking that, he beat her and then kept her at the house and then maybe beat her again. And then it got so severe, however she got to medical. It doesn't say much if he took her. There's so much that we don't know about 2018. Right. And I think, again, I know that sometimes there's a lot of cases and sometimes, and I think sometimes we all deal with this, is that we just want to get things over and done with so we can go ahead and move forward to the next one because the workload never stops. But sometimes you got to look at what you're pushing across, what you're settling, what you're accepting, because it may not just be for today, but what are you allowing to happen tomorrow? So I think sometimes we could push for the next case and let's just get this one out of the way because they've already agreed to accept the plea. Okay, so let's get that one out of the way. It's like, yeah, but once the person accepts the plea, what's the future of this individual? Yeah. I don't think that's always taken into account in some cases, but I do like saying corrections, we're all about preparing people for the future. And then we release them into society, but then we kind of don't know what happens next, right? So if this person here did go into the system and let's say corrections hit him up with programming, and well, he would probably been in jail because he only had 6 months, but programming and all this other stuff, when you pass them off back into the community, what are you passing them off into? Are they going to continue programming? Are they on their own? That pass off is a big gap. Yeah. Would you agree with that, Joe?
It is, and a lot of it, a lot of the states, it falls on the probation department once they get out because they're the ones that mandate the stipulations. They're the ones that mandate, programming, classes, reporting, whatever the case is. We give them what we can give them, prior to getting out in the Department of Corrections. And given that this guy only served 180 days, chances are he served them in a county jail where most county jails don't have that kind of programming, because county jails are kind of like the in-between. They're like the transient facilities between, either posting bond, getting back out on the street, or being convicted and sent to DOC. So, a lot of these county jails don't have that kind of programming. They don't have those kind of mandated courses, Planned Parenthood and Quest for Manhood and, those type of classes there. So, a lot of it, unfortunately, falls on your probations department to mandate the classes outside of the jail facility once they get out and to ensure that they're going to these classes.
Hey, that's a good point you mentioned, Joe, because I wonder if that's taken into account. Like, let's say, okay, you're going to accept the plea. Okay, well, I'm going to want to make sure you take some type of program, especially with anger management and whatnot. So I may need you to get over a year because I need you to hit that correction setting. I need you to hit that prison setting so we can get you into some programming and then go ahead. And once that's completed, we can then work on trying to get you out. Because you're right, I think, okay, he did 6 months, but did the jail offer him anything before he would have been released? It would have been better to say, you know what, I'm sorry, you got to at least do over a year because I got to get you into that prison environment because there's some program there that I really need you to get your hands on. So I'm very curious to see what he was able to take before he was released, or if he was mandated to continue taking anything or to start taking something once he was released as a condition to his probation or parole, whatever it was. Okay, so Joe, high-risk behavior. When someone beats a baby that badly, should they ever be trusted to be safe around kids again? Or do we need to admit some people are just permanently high risk?
Absolutely not. He should have never been trusted to be able to father children again. He should have been, like I said before, he should have been a never-ending CPS case. And I've seen it locally with some of our arrestees. They come in pregnant as soon as they have the baby's taken because they're high risk inmates. They're either high risk drug abusers, high risk abusers, whatever the case is, and the child is immediately taken from their custody, and it should have been the deal with him. He should have never been able to, just run and father more children. CPS should have been involved every step of the way. And I know it's hard to track fathers, it's hard to track mothers when they're having kids. But I think there should be some sort of safety net, some sort of, security net when, somebody goes to a hospital to have a child and their name is entered into the record for a birth certificate. I think it should be flagged in a database somewhere where they are tracked. And, the minute that they find out that this person who just, beat their former child so savagely that she's disabled for the rest of her life, trying to father another child, that should, that they need a better tracking system for that. And I don't think for any given moment that this guy should have been allowed to be around children, father children, be anywhere in the vicinity of a playground. He should have been treated like a high risk sex offender for the most part. I think abusers and sex offenders kind of rise to that same level and should never be around kids.
It's funny that you just said that because that's going to be the next question about, I think cruelty is not registered. So now sex offenders are, and there's a better tracking system for that. But I want to give my little perspective here with the rights. I get we all have human rights. But sometimes, I don't know if this is easier said than done, but there are certain actions, I believe, that you sacrifice your own rights. And we're not the ones that took it away. You did. Your actions did. Sometimes it's like, oh, you're going to take away their rights. No, we didn't take away their rights. They did. They did something foolish, and now they lost their rights. And to be honest with you, for people that are on the softer side of, rehabilitation, let's say criminal justice side, sometimes not giving them that right actually could be helping them. If you want to look at it that way. If you got someone that's that impulsive, that can't control their anger, then maybe it is good that we put systems in play to assist them. And one of them could be, sorry, at this point, you can't have any more children. If you do, that's going to be a violation of your probation or parole, whatever the route it was. So I know some people get so caught up, like it's so controversial because they got rights. It's, guys, we're making it too controversial. We really are making it too controversial because at the end of the day, take it to court. Let the person go ahead and sue that he wants the right to procreate. And then let's see if a judge gives it to him. And if something happens, then it falls on the judge. But we did enough to start a precedent. The precedents, let's get that moving forward. If I think we got to be, stop worrying so much about, the rights. Okay, so a guy that assaults a child to this level, we're more concerned about their rights than what could be a potential victim if we allow them to have another child again. I say go to court, put the effort in, and if someone decides, hey, they're still allowed to have a child, okay, fine. But we'll do it for the next one, and we'll keep on doing it and keep on being persistent until someone hears us, because there will be victims. And sadly, we don't want that. But if there's more victims, then we more have evidence to each argument we do. And eventually a judge is going to be like, you know what, man, I don't want the next victim to be on me. So at this case here, sorry, We're going to take away that right. You kind of touched on this, but if you want to add anything else, so we track sex offenders for life. Should we be doing the same with violent child abusers, or would that just get buried in bureaucracy?
Yeah, well, I mean, anything that we attempt to track will get buried in bureaucracy. But my opinion alone is that we track people who buy weapons. We track medical professionals who don't do their jobs and injure patients. We track nursing homes that abuse the elderly. So why would we not track an abuser who abuses defenseless kids? In my opinion, there should be a database for it. If you abuse a child that badly to the point where they're disabled for the rest of their life, you're damn straight. You should be in a database. You should be tracked. You should not be able to have child. You should not be able to be around children. And I think you should be held to that standard. And and again, every time a hospital enters a name into a record, it should be run. It should be run against any abuse database, a CPS database, any kind of negligence database, um, for past transgressions. And this guy is the poster child for the first person who should be entered into that database.
Yeah. And it's funny. I don't know if it's been being brought to the table, but should cruelty, be put in some tracking where if we're gonna accept these pleas, then maybe we should go ahead and say, okay, well, you know what? Then we'll start doing some tracking too, because just in case they get released and they do it again. And I want to mention something too, guys. There'll be some people watching this that says, you know what, maybe someone could fall into having a weak moment. They got a lot of pressure going on. Maybe the baby's crying, and they snap. Okay, I just want to mention something. Again, I'm not minimizing anything. God forbid you hit a baby once, which you should never do. But let's say you do, and then all of a sudden you realize what you've done. Most human beings will stop. What the hell did I just do? And hopefully they get the baby help immediately, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure they're going to have to go to jail. But then you see the fact that the person, maybe the moment got the best of them. Again, not minimizing what they've done, but hear me out. The moment got the best of them, they quickly got help for the baby. And then they're going to hold themselves accountable to whatever the system decides they can do it. And those are people you may be able to work on. I mean, we are human, you go into corrections, hopefully you work at some level of rehabilitation, maybe eventually trying to build some relationship later on with the child that, you may have hit once a little too hard. But again, with that said, then you get those like Haro here, Jake, who hits the child once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. I mean, this is a lot different than just the pressure of a situation. This could be more of who this person is. This is someone who just continued to do it repeatedly. And at that point here, in my mind, I don't care so much about their rights of having a child or not. Now, again, I'm not minimizing any assault on a child, but I just wanted to show the difference of doing it once, catching yourself, and like, what the hell did I just do? And then rushing that baby to where the baby's got to go, or that child to where that child's got to go, and then holding yourself accountable, admitting your guilt, and then just seeing where the system takes you. But then there are people that, as I said, beat the child, hide the bruises, beat the child again, hide the bruises until they can't, and then they bring the child. That to me is a lot more severe. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's added food for thought. If you can walk into a courtroom and a judge can tell you that you can never own another pet for the rest of your life because your pet was found in such neglect that court orders you that you can't have any more pets. Why in the hell would we not do that for babies, for children? This guy here wasn't a one-time thing. It was definitely apparent that this child suffered ongoing abuse for a while. This wasn't a one-time thing. And this guy was really never, in my mind, and in my opinion, really held accountable. That 6-month sentence to me was pretty laughable. and then to add probation on top of it is even, I mean, it was just like, like it was a dope case. I mean, it just blows me away that this is all that this guy got. But again, it goes to what they could prove at the time. And, I just think that honestly that, this guy should have been prevented back then at the onset, um, you know, of having any children in the household, period. And it should have stayed that way for the remainder of his life.
Yeah, and one thing in corrections that they teach us, guys, is you look for patterns, because patterns really tell you who somebody is, because situations could get the best of us, pressures could get the best of us. And then maybe at one point, if it does get the best of us, we can work through that to help us deal with those pressures a bit better. But if that's just who you are, and the pattern is just you, then eventually it's not about the pressure, it's just who you are. It's just who you are. And that is a lot more serious to me. And as I said, in corrections, we have to make decisions. And sometimes, not that we want to, but sometimes we really have to look at the individual and then look at what they've done, especially when it comes to the rehabilitation side. And we have to make a determination. Is this person worth saving? I mean, were there some pressures that they just didn't know how to react to? Or is it them? And that's a lot for the people who do the rehabilitation and corrections, because they truly have to see past the crime, see past what they've done to really get to the individual. And that doesn't mean they're forgiving them. It just means that, hey, this person did let the pressure get the best of them, but this is not a repeat offender. This is someone who did a crime that they were highly emotional with, they were connected with, but they're really not evil. But unfortunately, the consequences were so brutal that, and the funny thing is, someone mentioned this to me one day, it was one of our psychs. They said something like, it was more of like a jealous rage. Some people will imagine doing the worst and not do it. And some people imagine it and do it. But both parties are still imagining it. It's just one person has better control over the other. And it doesn't make them a bad person. And they think that they can work with these individuals to control that rage. But again, it's just a different perspective. And in no way are we, giving people excuses, just another way to look at things. The sentencing debate. So people hear 6 months for a baby beaten into permanent disability and immediately say, throw the book at them. Joe, what's your gut? Do you mandatory minimums help, or do they just make the courts play games in other ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there should have been a mandatory minimum on this one, especially given the circumstances of this child's physical appearance and what the child is going to go through for the remainder of her life. Definitely should have been a mandatory minimum. I'm not talking about months. I'm talking about years. And I really think they need to revisit their abuse guidelines and sentencing guidelines for that state. Because when somebody can come in with 200 grams of methamphetamines and score 20 years versus somebody who beat a defenseless child and only gets 6 months, there's a problem there. There's definitely a problem there, and I think there should have been a mandatory minimum of at least like I said, years. I'm not talking about months, but there should have been a mandatory minimum. And it should have been a DOC setting. It should not have been a county jail setting. And, given the fact that he only got 6 months, chances are he did his time at the county.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It is a violent act, so I agree, the mandatory minimums. Plus, when there's a mandatory minimum, maybe you could also connect some things, as I said, some type of program, something to control that anger, that impulse, because I don't think that was ever addressed, because he just gets sentenced in 2023, and then 2 years later,
father and children
does it again. So now the next one I got, there's 4 more questions. This relates to Child Protective Services, CPS. And you mentioned them before, Joe, is CPS steps in after the murder. This is going to be for Emmanuel. They believe that, as I said, he's been murdered. They believe there's enough evidence there to charge the adults with murder. And that maybe they're also pushing the charge for murder on both adults, because maybe if the baby is missing, this will pressure them to tell us where the baby is. And then also gives them something to work with. show us where the body is. Tell us where the body is, and we could figure out something. If not for, if Haro was the main player, Jake, then maybe we could do a little something for Rebecca if you really love her. If you really love her, because that recovering that body gives them a lot of, it gives the Haro family a lot of leverage here, because people need that body. Ultimately, they're going to need that at some level, I believe, for the conviction. Maybe not. But sometimes people hold on to that body because they know eventually people are going to want closure, and that could give them leverage into bargaining into what they would consider to be a better deal. So hopefully the police are able to discover that body soon, and hopefully on their own, so that these guys literally have to face the courts with no plea, no leverage, no nothing. Because if it goes on for a while and they can't find that body, I could picture some bargaining, because finding the body would be, at that point, what would be the most important. But Joe, just as the question here, so CPS steps in after the murder, but where were they before Emmanuel was born? How do you explain this disconnect between agencies that are supposed to protect kids?
Yeah, in CPS, CPS and FPS, what the Child Protective Service and Family Protective Services, are probably two agencies that had the least amount of personnel and probably overworked. Given a daily scenario, you can only imagine how many calls they get for supposed abuse cases, pissed off neighbor, or pissed off family member, whatever. But CPS should have been involved at the onset with the first child. That like I said, this guy should have had an ongoing case that never closed. And I find it a little. I find it a little troubling that they allowed time to pass. He went to jail, got out, and it was like he was just, it was over and done with. He was forgotten about. On to the next. He should have been on the constant radar. And the fact that CPS is involved now and trying to, they're pushing for murder charges again. Without that child's body, it's a gamble trying to get a conviction. But at this point, given his past pattern and history, you have means, motive, and opportunity. Because it's a well documented fact that this guy abuses kids. But given the fact that they don't have a body, it's kind of a tough one to try to push in front of a jury. But like I said, given this guy's history, it may be an easy conviction. We don't know. Having that child's body would be very beneficial. Just for the fact of the other family members who actually love these children, it gives them closure. It also gives the prosecutors, more concrete, solid medical evidence as to the current crime. And I think this guy should have never left the radar. It just kind of sounds like that he took the plea deal, went to jail, got out, and it was all over and done with. He should have been on the constant radar.
Yeah, I Googled this. It says, yes, it's harder to convict someone of murder without a body, but it's not impossible. These are often called no-body homicide cases, and while rare, many successful prosecutions have occurred. The challenges and possibilities break down like this. Why is it harder? Proof of death. Without a body, the defense can argue that the alleged victim may still be alive or missing voluntarily. Prosecutors must prove not only that the person is dead, but also that the death was caused by the defendant. Cause of death. In most murder cases, the body provides key forensic evidence: gunshot wound, strangulation marks, toxicology. Without it, the prosecution must rely on circumstantial evidence, confessions, or witness testimony. And then you got the jury skepticism. Jurors are often uneasy convicting someone of murder if there's no physical proof of death. It feels less certain, which the defense can exploit. I think California also has the death penalty, so I don't know if without a body is the death penalty even something that could be pushed. But right now, it says how convictions happen anyway. Strong circumstantial evidence, like you said, things like surveillance footage, digital footprints, last seen testimony, or sudden disappearance without financial or personal activity, bank accounts untouched. Well, this is a baby here. Defendant statements incriminate in texts, phone calls, or confessions. Even partial ones can carry huge weights. I don't know if they were talking through anything that digital forensics can discover. Forensics evidence without a body, blood, DNA, which is what they're doing at the house now, or other biological material at a crime scene can demonstrate that the person likely died even if the body is missing. And I really think that's what happened. I think they found stuff around the house, in the house, whatever it was. I mean, they were taking carpet, they were going through dumpster. I mean, they must have found something that led them to that conclusion. And the motive and opportunity, a clear motive combined with opportunity and supporting circumstantial evidence can convince a jury. It gave me 3 examples. It says Scott Peterson in 2004, convicted of murdering his wife, Lacey Peterson, before her body was found. Though her remains surfaced later, the conviction was already based on strong circumstantial evidence. It gave Hans Reiser, convicted of murdering his wife it was in 2008 without a body. He later led police to the remains after conviction. And Keely Lane of Australia, 2010, convicted of murdering her newborn baby despite no body ever being found. And I thought that was a little bit more similar. So yeah, it could be a bit challenging. I just want to put down, I'll ask you the next question, but I want to put down, out of curiosity, if there's anyone that's ever been sentenced to death penalty and carried out without a body. Because I know, again, without a body, there could be some leverage. And I know they hold on to leverage because I've seen it. Okay, so the next question, Joe, was patterns versus one-off. Is this just one nightmare case, or are we seeing the same pattern of underreaction to child abuse over and over again? What have you noticed just in your career? I mean, you see a lot of people coming in and out of the jail.
Yeah, I mean, you have one-offs. Your one-offs are not very often. Chances are, if they've abused a child before, they're going to do it again. You find it more, prevalent in parents that are strung out on drugs. I see it every day, child neglect charges because, they're passed out and the child's roaming around, in their diaper full of feces, and there's meth and coke all over the coffee table that the child get into. There's different patterns of abuse. Again, you find it in the parents that have, some sort of drug or alcohol history. Not so much one-offs anymore. Granted, some of the ass whoopings I took as a child, you know, I would call them one-offs. But I was kind of a plank kid when I was a kid, so they came pretty frequent. But there's a difference between discipline and abuse. And again, you find it more prevalent in adults who are, you know, you know, prone to drug or alcohol issues. And we see a lot of them. In most of those circumstances, the child's placed with a family member who's not, who's been vetted, been looked at, no criminal history, no abuse history, no complaints, nothing through CPS or FPS. So a lot of the times these children are placed with family members that are, sturdy, have a good foundation for the child to be in, until such time as the parents get off or weaned or let go of the drugs or alcohol, take their classes, and work their way back into being a parent again. But definitely a huge difference between one-off and just full-on abuse.
Yeah, and guys, I want to go back to the death penalty thing. So California does have the death penalty. It's kind of what me and Joe discussed already. So the strategic use of body location, pre-trial plea bargaining. Defense attorneys often use the location of a victim's body as leverage to negotiate a plea deal that removes the death penalty from consideration. Because again, if the body was discovered, definitely people will be putting capital murder. They'll be pushing for the death penalty. So they're probably not going to want that body to be discovered, because that puts death penalty on the table. Prosecutors may agree to life without parole instead of death in exchange for leading them to the remains, which we talked about. And this gives families closure and saves the state the expenses of uncertainty of death penalty trial. This is exactly what happened in some famous cases. For Han Reiser, we talked about before, 2008, As you mentioned in your original analysis, he was convicted of murdering his wife without the body being found. After conviction, he negotiated to reduce his sentence from first degree to second degree murder by leading police to his wife's remains. Some defendants hold on to body location information through trial, then use it post-conviction to negotiate better prison conditions, transfers, or sentence reductions. Others reveal locations years later as part of appeal or clemency requests. Why the strategy works: for the defense, it removes the ultimate penalty from the table, can result in significantly shorter sentences, and provides ongoing leverage even after conviction. For prosecutors, guarantees a conviction without the risk of death penalty trial, provides closure for families, and saves substantial time and resources. And for families, it allows proper burial and grieving process and ends years of uncertainty about their loved one's faith. Legal and ethical considerations. This creates typical ethical questions. Should someone benefit from withholding information about their victim's location? Is it worth giving up the death penalty to provide family closure? And does this incentivize defendants to hide bodies as insurance policies? And most prosecutors and families ultimately decide that finding the remains and getting a guaranteed life sentence is preferable to pursuing death and potentially never recovering the body, even if the defendant is executed. This strategy demonstrates how the absence of a body can actually become a defendant's most valuable asset in avoiding the ultimate punishment. That was powerful where it said at the end, most prosecutors and families ultimately decide that finding the remains and getting a guaranteed life sentence is preferable to pursuing death and potentially never recovering the body, even if the defendant is executed. Because again, there's no closure. Because some family will still believe, he's still out there, she's still out there, and I want the closure. I was watching the Lori Vallow case where they were worried about Tylee and JJ, and Kay, who was the sister of Charles Vallow's husband, that she wind up, with the help of Chad Daybell, whatever his name is, Chad Bell, whatever his last Chad. They took Charles out. But with that said, she even said, at least I got closure. She just wanted to know where he was. And of course, she wanted him alive. When they found out later on that he was buried near a tree next to Tylee, which was the sister. Lori Vallow, actually, it wasn't really his sister, but someone he saw as his sister. She got the closure. She got the closure that she needed. I also wanted to search something real quick. I wanted to search death sentences with no bodies. And based on the search results, they looked at hundreds of murder convictions without a body have occurred in the past. So we know that's happened. The searchers didn't return specific documented cases of people being executed rather than just sentenced to death without a body being found. The short answer is it's probably extremely rare and difficult to find documented cases. If anybody knows one, let me know. And why is it so rare? You need higher evidentiary standards for death penalty cases. Courts typically require much stronger evidence for capital cases than regular murder cases. Extensive appeal process. Death penalty cases go through years, decades of appeal, during which bodies are sometimes discovered. And prosecutorial discretion. DAs may be reluctant to seek the death penalty in no-body cases due to the inherent uncertainty. What the evidence shows is, when I looked it up, is hundreds of no-body murder convictions have occurred, but most result in life sentences rather than death sentences. And the search results show many examples of no-body murder convictions, but don't identify specific cases where someone was actually executed. So without finding specific documented cases in their search, I cannot definitively say whether anyone has been executed in a no-body case, though it's theoretically possible. The lack of readily available examples suggests it's either never happened or happened so rarely that such cases aren't well documented in accessible sources. All right, but it said if you want to research the topic, you might want to contact the Death Penalty Information Center directly, as they would have the most comprehensive records of executed cases and their specific circumstances. Guys, that's why we do these shows, because you learn so much in the process. It's good. I'm also going to start bringing more people on as well. Maybe have Joe and Russ sit with me as we interview different people, because we're learning a lot in the process. Got two more questions, Joe, if you don't mind. And I told Joe it was only 40 minutes, but Joe knows when he responds that I lie. So Joe knows.
A lot.
But just two more. So Joe, if you could, this is more personal, if you could change one thing. So if you had the power to change just one thing in the justice system to prevent another Emmanuel Haro, there he is, what would it be?
Definitely to add a database for constant abusers. I wholeheartedly think that anybody who abuses, A woman or a man in a relationship should be tracked. I wholeheartedly believe that anybody who abuses a child should be tracked and should be in a database, just like sex offenders are. That would definitely be the one thing. I mean, we have databases for everything else. Why the hell would we not start a database that would protect future innocent victims?
Yeah, I think for me, I totally agree with you. That's what I was thinking when I did this before. The only thing I would also add is we got to start looking at this argument about rights versus, the rights of one when it infringes on the other. I mean, we really got to look at things and just say, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, that person actually lost his rights. We didn't take it away. Their own actions did. Maybe if people, I know that their rights and the things that were guaranteed, and I get it. But if at any point those rights can now affect someone else's well-being, we really got to look at that and then weigh it out. Because doesn't the next child have the right to avoid cruel and unusual punishment? And is there a good high probability that if this person here who has the right to procreate has another child, will that child now have their rights violated? And at this point here, we have to make a choice. And there's nothing controversial here. I just say bring it to court, bring it to court, bring it to court. And if they want to challenge it, keep on bringing it to court until there's enough evidence to say, you know what, judge, think before you're doing it. Because I'm going to give you some names right now, and I want you to remember these names. And then I don't want to add this one to the list. Yeah. Because every time a judge, winds up making that decision, they're either going to stop the names from keeping on growing or they're going to add. The last question I got, Joe, is the bigger question. It's the bigger question for you. At the end of the day, Joe, do you think the system is even designed to put child safety first, or is it really built around adult offenders with kids always coming second?
That's a tough one. The system was well intended. I'm trying to say this tactfully and politically. It was well intended, but piss poorly planned. I don't think that when it was designed in its infancy, back in the 80s, or I don't think we didn't see the level of abuse that we're seeing now. Now, I know for those of us who were born in the 60s and 70s who took them whippings from our parents, beg to differ, because there's been some times that I've toted some. But I think the difference is now that we have so many people now that are running around the planet with diagnosed mental health illnesses. I think that is something that's compounding the system, because it's too easy to say that that wasn't him, that was his disease that made him do that, versus no, he's just an abuser. I think CPS and FPS has a hell of a time prosecuting cases because of the fact that we have so many people with mental health illnesses now, versus drug and alcohol illnesses. That's probably playing a portion into this poor child falling through the cracks. But I do think I think now it's more geared towards adult getting counseling and rolling the dice and hoping it works, versus the child's rights coming into play. I wholeheartedly believe that CPS should protect the child first, and any other subsequent child that may be in a household, especially if you got somebody who has a documented pattern of of an abuse history on children. I think it definitely needs a long, hard look. I think the system needs to be revamped, as far as procedures, and and I understand, because I see it from the probationary side too. When we let people out on probation, a lot of these people that we get are transits and don't have homes in our county. Therefore, they got to find them some sort of placement, either a halfway house or some sort of probationary home where they can do their time until they get back on their feet, or whatever the case is. So I'm sure child placement is just as tough, especially when you don't have family members in the picture who can take custody of the children, who are financially able to take custody of the children, who can care for them medically, physically, emotionally, educationally, and I know it's a battle that they fight, and because I've seen that aspect of it too. But at the end of the day, the agency was created to protect the welfare and the rights of children, and that's exactly what I think it should be doing.
Yeah, I don't know if this would be a campaign or not. Maybe get some shirts, but I think the question should be what happens next. I
Yeah,
mean, after the person Jake went through the system the first time, and they did the plea, whatever it is, someone should have asked what happens next. I think that's where things could become preventable when you start really thinking of the consequences of your actions or the decisions that you're making. And I kind of feed in what Joe said. I think I said this earlier as well with when we have children, I don't know, can they advocate for themselves? And when there's no greater support, who advocates for them? Could Promise been someone that didn't have people strongly advocating for her? Maybe in the end, they were advocating more for Jake, because that's my brother, that's my son, and now the victim gets disregarded because you're allowing your love to blind you to what that person did. That's the scary thing, but I believe that's true. So who are the advocates? And I will guarantee you, if Promise's case was taken to a higher level, and if the media would have ran with it like they did with this one, there would be a higher level of justice that would have been served for Promise. I believe so. I mean, now Emmanuel is going to definitely ensure that, because the support is going to come from the attention that's given, where the prosecutor is going to feel the pressure to have to do something.
yeah,
But when there was no attention and that prosecutor was free of pressure, maybe he made a lighter choice. I don't know, or she made a lighter choice. I don't know. I'm just saying. But I think when you have the pressure of the media and the pressure of people wanting that answer and then wanting that accountability, maybe that'll be the first time prosecutor said there will be no plea here. I'm taking it to the distance. But
yeah.
again, I just wish it wasn't pressure that made us do that. I just wish we did the right thing because it was the right thing. That's what I wish. Because then it turns out to be that the right thing tends to be conditional based on who's watching.
Yeah.
I don't know. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, my heart goes out to this child, and I hate that this guy was allowed to father another child who's now presumed dead and missing. Um, you know, One thing I do kind of want to add, we were talking about the capital murder thing, and I'm going to be quite honest here. If I was sitting on a jury and there was no body, I would be hard pressed to go for a capital murder charge. Um, just because of the fact that there is no body. I mean, we can't even say that the child's dead, and it's hard to get a capital murder charge on this instance because in most states you got to commit another felony in the midst of this murder, and without those two there, it's hard to get a capital murder charge sustained anyway. Um, but they're all agencies are imperfect, mine included. Everybody's agencies have room for improvement. A lot of it starts with the laws in individual states. That's where they need to start. They need to take a look at their individual laws for the state, for the counties, and they need to revisit some of these, and they need to make the laws more concrete. They need to make the laws where they, bring in agencies such as CPS and FPS and whatever, where they work this thing together and give a good case. From that point, I wholeheartedly believe that, this prosecutor's office lacked the integrity to prosecute this case to its fullest. Again, this is just my opinion only, that this 6 month sentence was laughable for the abuse that this child took, um, and the effects that this child is going to have for the remainder of her life. She's never going to have a quality of life. She's never going to graduate from a school. She's never going to get the chance to go to college or be a successful, productive human um, in the world. Never going to be able to have children, married, the whole gamut. I think the penalties definitely need to be revisited. The laws need to be relooked at. And I think some of these agencies need to sit down with each other and have that discussion at the round table. What can we do to prevent this in the future? I think, it's a little late in the game to say it, but if you don't start now, we're gonna be having the same conversation 6 months down the road when another child gets abused and dies.
Yeah, and guys, I'm going to try to follow this case. I mean, as of now, I'm still on the job. I have 2 more years left, and following these cases are hard, but I do try my best. And a lot of people give me information that I need, and I can pick and choose what I feel works best, that we feel comfortable to express. Plus, I got partners like Joe and Russ that could team up, and I'll start bringing in other guests as well. But with that said, I'm going to follow this a little bit. I'm also going to follow the case out of Arkansas too. I think the guy's name is Andrew McGadden. He's the one that killed 2 hikers, and then their children were led to safety by the mother. But then when she went back, first he killed the father. The mother took the 2 kids to safety. Then when she came back, he killed her. I want to see what happens with that. It's a school teacher, and I want to have someone to come on the show. I'm just waiting for him to give me the okay. He's going to explain how background checks work for teachers. And I know people are talking about pass the trash. There's a lot in play when it comes to information being sent from district to district. And it's just sometimes if people are accused of doing bad things, but they're not found guilty of it, it's just the accusation. Sometimes those accusations get lost because, again, the person being accused has rights too. So a lot of liability. And again, the word's rights. Sometimes a lot of things that could be preventable is when someone decides to kind of say, you know what, I don't care about this person's rights or not. I'm going to go ahead and do this. And usually that person winds up setting a strong standard. Because it could have been just someone saying with the McGadden case, hey, I don't care about him, about him or anybody suing me. If I say something negative, I don't want him doing anything with a child. I'll deal with the lawsuit. This is what we think this person is doing or could have the chance of accomplishing. As always, guys, the show is tiered. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.